All right, welcome class to our week 14 presentation. This week we're going to get started reading The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams. So I thought it would be interesting to go ahead and take a closer look at Williams and his life and how that relates to the play. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, Tennessee Williams, originally born Thomas Lanier Williams, was born in Columbus, Mississippi, and then he moved to St. Louis in 1918, so when he was 7. And so we like to claim Tennessee Williams as a Missouri writer, for sure, although he did spend a lot of other time outside of Missouri. As an adult, spent a lot of time in Key West and in New York, so and New Orleans, but he was definitely influenced by St. Louis. He grew up in a home where his mother was aggressive and obsessed by genteel Southern living. He had a father that traveled a lot. He was a shoe salesman, so he was very distant, but he was also abusive. He had an older sister, Rose, who was lobotomized, so she had a mental illness, and it was common practice of the era to lobotomize people with mental illness, and so she spent most of her life in a mental institution, although Tennessee Williams did remain pretty close to her. He had a younger brother, Dakin, who was favored by the father and over the elder children. So Williams had a pretty tumultuous childhood, and a lot of that centered around him feeling different than everyone else. For one thing, he was a homosexual, so that kind of was definitely frowned upon at the time. His father was very negative toward him because of that, and later, his partner later in life died, and that really highly affected Tennessee Williams and his later life in terms of getting into drug abuse and alcoholism, and was himself in a mental institution. So you see not only this distressing kind of problem with childhood and parents in Williams' plays, but you'll also see that in his life. So you can kind of then understand why he uses some of the themes that he does. So looking at his works, which he wrote over 30 plays. The Glass Menagerie was his first successful play. It was on Broadway and won several awards, was made into a movie. He also wrote A Streetcar Named Desire, which also won a lot of awards, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. So he has a lot of really famous plays, wrote over 30, and was a poet also. So he was prolific in his time for sure. And he really did focus a lot of his works on the Southern experience and really the conflicts between gentility of the old Southern values and a more practical Northern value, and really that kind of move into the modern era as well. His conflicts in the plays very much center around his own experience. We could see plays discuss sexuality, society, Christianity. Those are part of his dramas and his life. And then we also see that his plays really show the negative impact that conventional society has on the sensitive, nonconformist individual. And I think that is important when you look at who Tennessee Williams was. I would say that he very much could have been considered a sensitive, nonconformist individual, for sure. So he emphasizes the irrational, desperate condition of humanity in the universe in which cosmic laws do not work. So just, feeling lost and feeling displaced is very much a part of his works. Now, we're looking at this era, what I call the civil rights era between 1919 and the 1970s. And so we want to look at how does Williams fit into our focus as a class, and why do we read literature, and how does literature impact history, and how does history impact literature? Well, we can say that Williams' works definitely fit in the era because he wrote the works during the time frame, and also they're set in the era in which they are written. So the Glass Menagerie opened up on Broadway in 1945, so right there in the middle. But we also see a clear connection between what Williams is writing and what other modernists are writing at the same time. So he addresses similar themes, so related to breaking from tradition, like we saw in several of the short stories that we read. So, for instance, Miss Brill was a story that really talked about the transition between new and between old and new, and we see that in several of the works we've read. The loss and exile, which, I mean, Miss Brill is also a great example of that. But we also see that in Dead Man's Path, and we see these same ideas of breaking with tradition, breaking with rules and conformity, even in our Raymond Bradbury story. So we definitely see these similar kind of themes. Social evils are addressed in his work, particularly with the Southern tradition, and we see that with A Rose for Emily for sure, and William Faulkner's works. So we see that correlation between different writers and Williams at the same time. And Williams was also a writer that broke from tradition himself with his works. So his plays often presented ideas that were brand new to the modern stage. So he addressed sexual frustration, he addressed mental illness, physical ailments, that emasculation, alcoholism. So he addressed all of those things in his plays, and it was really different, and very much could have been why he was so successful. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the modern stage, and actually I'm going to take you back to the first slide because I think that this is interesting. So Williams' plays, and you'll see from the stage direction when you read the play this week and as we move forward, he doesn't set up a traditional stage. So a lot of the actions are pantomimed. We have images up on a projector screen. Parts of the house are partitioned with screens or curtains that are see-through, unlike what we would see in a normal stage setting where you have one set and then the curtain closes and they change the set around and the curtain opens and there's the new set. But in the Glass Menagerie, and even through Williams' stage direction, this is completely different. And this is actually a photo from a play of the Glass Menagerie being put on by a theater. And I think it's interesting to see this because we can see that, yes, we have those elements of, 1930s furniture and that kind of stuff, but you see the curtain in the background and you see there's a room behind that curtain. And in different parts of the play, there are interactions between characters and moving around different parts of the house or going outside. So the stage is just set in a less typical way. And I think that is an interesting element of Williams' writing. So for instance, lighting is a big part of the way that Williams sets up the play. So in the original production notes, Williams describes the lighting as dim and poetic, which I think is interesting. I really enjoy, like in August Wilson's Fences, reading those stage directions, because as an audience member, we don't necessarily see stage directions and how the writer actually presents things unless we read the play. And so when we read Tennessee Williams' stage directions, we kind of get a glimpse at the language that Williams would use and how it interprets this, how the stage should be set and setting. So lighting is connected to gauze curtains. So you use gauze curtains in with lighting to create kind of a different unreal aura to the set. Maybe have the idea that family lives in a dream world, so this is not a realistic setting. And not only is it a modern stage setting, but it also reflects onto the characters and onto the story. The lighting gives a pleasant disguise of illusion, which I think is a theme that we see a lot in Williams' works. It also focuses on absent characters. So we'll see that Mr. Wingfield's picture is on the wall and the lighting is projected onto it. So it's a focal point. He's a character in the play without actually being in the play. And really that has a lot to do with the lighting. But music is also a big part of this particular play, and I do suggest, if you have the opportunity, to look up the songs that are mentioned in the stage direction, so that you can kind of get a clearer understanding of what Williams is attempting with the addition of music and with the addition of images. So it's used throughout the play to evoke moods and memory. Williams once described the recurring glass menagerie theme as a tune that is light and delicate, as fragile as spun glass. So he uses music to reflect the glass menagerie. The glass menagerie reflects our character Laura, which we'll see as we go through. In this quote, it says, "It is primarily Laura's music, and therefore comes out most clearly when the play focuses upon her and the lovely fragility of glass, which is her image." So I think that's interesting how music is connected to character and to story. Now, other things to think about as we move into this play. So there are a lot of symbols, a lot of motifs used also, and so I wanted to define a few things. So the glass menagerie, a menagerie is like a grouping of things, often thought of like a zoo. Okay, so a glass menagerie would be a collection of glass animal figurines, and it really represents fragility within the characters. So the relationships between mother and daughter, between son and mother, between the siblings, looking at the characters in the story and how fragile their relationships are. The glass unicorn in particular is a symbol for Laura's character. There's a motif of glass throughout the play. So you look at the conservatory at the zoo. So she goes to the glass house, which is, or the jewel house is what people in St. Louis like to call it. So the jewel box, the glass house where all the botanical flowers are. And she likes to go there and spend time there, and it's kind of a haven, but it's a house made of glass. And so we have this glass coming through, showing how vulnerable Laura is and how fragile she is. And then there's a glass ball that hangs from the ceiling of the dance hall, and that reflects rainbow colors and represents the dreams of the dancers. So we don't actually see the dance hall in the play, but we do hear about it. And we also have colors as symbols in the play. So blue is associated with Laura. She's actually called Blue Roses by one of the characters. And yellow is commonly linked to Amanda. So blue roses is kind of a contrary to nature phenomenon. We don't generally see roses that are blue naturally. And there's an opposition between these strange different flowers and the natural sunny jonquils associated with Amanda. So Laura is depicted as kind of a strange character, so something out of the ordinary. And strange doesn't necessarily mean bad, but different, out of the ordinary, somewhat ethereal and dreamy in a sense. And then we also have, in the original version of the play, Amanda's party dress in scene 6, which we're not quite there, is described as a girlish frock of yellowed voile. And it's lemony lighting. So we have this idea of yellow connecting to Amanda's character, outgoing and optimistic and forward thinking in terms of putting herself forward. So we see those different personalities represented by color. So as you're reading this week and further on, I'd like you to think of a few questions, and you might think of this also in terms of discussion boards that are coming out. But how does this play fit into our thinking in terms of the era that we're reading? So the themes, the motifs, the ideas that we've seen already from other works. So how does it fit in with the canon of works that we've been looking at? And a major idea in Williams' work and other works from the era have to do with authority of the narrator, which previously we had we had third-person perspective narrators, where it's kind of an omniscient, outside of the story narrator. And in this play and other short stories that we've read, had that first-person perspective. And in particular, this one has an interesting connection between a narrator and the audience, and how does that relate to other works that we've read? And do you think that the play would suffer if we removed that element of the narrator's authority? And then look at, how does the play written and set in an era, we have discussed this term, differ from Williams' Fences? So we just got finished, or Wilson's Fences, sorry, getting my W's mixed up. So August Wilson, we just finished reading Fences, and does this play connect in any way? Do you see any similarities, any major differences? And how does that impact in terms of, remember, August Wilson wrote his play after our era that we're discussing, but it was set in the era we're discussing. And here we have Williams that's writing during the same time that his play is set in. So that's an interesting thing to think about. So this is my works cited. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to send them my way. And I look forward to hearing about your impressions of the Glass Menagerie. All right, bye.